The story of Moses is probably one of the most famous stories in the world. That's mainly due to the fact it's in 3 of the world's largest religions. The most famous moment of this story is probably Moses parting the Red Seas, but a close runner-up to that would be the 10 plagues of Egypt. In this story, the Hebrew god, who I will refer to as Adonai for this video. For those who don't know, Adonai means Lord and is commonly used in place of God's real name in the Jewish religion. Adonai uses Moses to demonstrate his power over the Egyptian pantheon, and he does that by sending plagues upon Egypt. Every plague symbolizes Adonai defeating at least one Egyptian god, but there are some plagues you could interpret him defeating multiple. If you would like to know more about this interpretation of the plagues of Egypt, and see which Egyptian gods are in for a smackdown, come along as we explore 10 plagues of Egypt. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. You'll find the links below. Thank you. For those who don't know the context of this story, at this point, the Hebrews have been enslaved in Egypt for centuries. No, they're not building pyramids. We don't really know what they're doing, but probably just farming or something like that. Moses had been sent by Adonai to free them from slavery, but when Pharaoh refuses to free the Hebrews, Adonai sends the plagues onto Egypt. These plagues don't exclusively mean sickness, they're more just general natural disasters. The first plague was to show Adonai's power over Egypt as a whole, and he did this by turning the Nile red with blood. The Nile was the center of Egyptian society. You can even see it today on a population map of Egypt. The Nile watered their crops, and they even drank out of it. So you can imagine turning it to blood probably would cause a bit of an upset. By turning the water of the Nile into blood, Adonai demonstrated that with the first plague, he could easily wipe out Egypt with a snap of his fingers. And he simultaneously also demonstrated his power over the gods of the Nile. Keyword, gods. There were multiple gods of the Nile, given how long Egypt lasted, but some of the most famous ones were Hapi and Sobek. Technically, Sobek is a god of crocodiles, but he had many associations with the Nile due to the fact that it was full of crocodiles. That's 2 gods down. Who knows how many more to go? Despite this impressive display of power, Pharaoh refused to let Moses' people go, so Adonai sent in the next plague. A swarm of frogs came out of the Nile. The frogs had a double meaning. First of all, there were so many frogs crawling into people's homes, which was just annoying. But along with that, frogs were also a symbol of Heket, a fertility goddess. By taking control of her symbol, Adonai showed that he had power over her and her domain, and by extension, people's fertility. Pharaoh still didn't listen, so then the third plague came along, a swarm of lice. The third plague was meant to show Adonai's power over Geb, the Egyptian god of the earth. The ground the Egyptians used to plant their food was turned to lice, along with all the dust in their homes. On top of ruining all their crops, Egypt now had a massive head lice problem, and it probably stuck around even after the Hebrews left because pesticides had not been invented yet. Adonai ruining the Egyptian soil was him conquering Geb, and turning it into lice was again further annoyance for the people. During these first few plagues, Pharaoh had his priests try to copy Moses' miraculous acts, but as time went on, they admitted they were out of their league. Despite their admission though, Pharaoh's heart hardened and he wouldn't let the Hebrews go free. The fourth plague was a swarm of flies that was supposed to block out the sun god, Ra. No, not that one. We're only 4 plagues in, and Adonai has already defeated Egypt's most powerful god. We still have 6 more to go, guys. Buckle up. Once again, Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the Hebrews go. So the next plague targeted all the cattle in Egypt. This was to show power over Hetert. Hetert was the Egyptian goddess of love, protection, and the family life. Her symbol was a cow, and by killing all of Egypt's cows, not only did Adonai show his control over the familial structure of Egypt, he also got rid of a major food source. Moving along, the 6th plague cursed Egyptians with boils that could not be cured by the priests. This was to combat the Egyptian gods of medicine and magic, of which there are several: Tot, Isis, and Heka, just to name a few. The priests had already fully admitted they could not do anything against Moses and Adonai, and they urged Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go. But still, Pharaoh resisted. His heart was hardened. The 7th plague had hail raining down from the sky. This is supposed to show that the sky goddess Nut had lost her domain to Adonai. There are two ways these plagues can go. Either Adonai overpowers the Egyptian god, like he does by blocking the sun, demonstrating his victory over Ra, or he takes control of their domain. This second action is arguably more embarrassing because it shows Adonai multitasking. He can beat the Egyptian god and control their domain at the same time. Multitasking is a rare skill. The eighth plague is probably the most famous and the most dreaded plague, the swarm of locusts. This is what you think of when you think of the plagues of Egypt. Locusts coming from far off in the desert. The desert was the dominion of Set, a god of chaos. Again, Adonai is taking control of a god's domain and redirecting that domain at Egypt. He did it with Nut, the sky, and hail, and now he's done it with Set. His domain was the desert, and now a swarm of locusts is coming out from the desert and into Egypt. I think the worst part about the locust plague, though, is because it's so late into the game. By this point, there's been a plague of lice, a loss of livestock, and hail. There were arguably no crops left in Egypt, so the only thing the locusts had to eat were the people. Imagine how itchy that was. The ninth plague took another stab at the sun, but this time for 3 whole days the sun did not rise in Egypt. Maybe at this point Adonai was running out of ideas, or maybe he was trying to show his command over multiple sun gods. Ra, god of the afternoon sun, Khepri, god of the morning sun, and Atum, god of the evening sun. 3 sun gods, 3 days of darkness? Coincidence? I think not! Anyway, the Egyptians feared Adonai because by this point he had defeated over a dozen of their gods, and the priests had long since admitted they stood no chance against the God of the Hebrews. But Pharaoh still wouldn't let the slaves go. And this is where the story takes an incredibly dark turn. For the final plague of Egypt, Adonai has decided to do harm to the Pharaoh himself. The Pharaoh was the ultimate symbol of power in Egypt, a god in human form, at least that's how the Egyptians saw it. But Adonai would not harm the Pharaoh directly. No, he wanted to break him, spiritually and emotionally. The 10th plague was the death of the firstborns. During the night, Adonai, or an angel of destruction, depends on the translation you use, and the original Hebrew is not very clear, some kind of divine being went into Egypt and killed every firstborn child, both human and animal, what few animals were left in Egypt by this point. The only exceptions in this massacre were the Hebrews who painted their doors with goat's blood, so that way Adonai, or the angel of destruction, would know to spare their lives. He would pass over their homes, which is how the Jews get the Passover celebration. The death of the firstborns was devastating, because not a single family in Egypt was spared. It was the symbolic destruction of that family's future, for those with multiple children, and for those with only one child. And it was especially devastating for those one-child families, because the death of that one child signified the end of that family's bloodline. In one night, Adonai took away the future of an entire generation in Egypt, including their future ruler, as Pharaoh's firstborn son died during this plague. Now, if that seems cruel, it should be noted, this is a case of divine retribution. The 10th plague is Adonai avenging the deaths of the firstborn Hebrews who were slaughtered during Moses' infancy. Moses was the only firstborn child who survived that slaughter. After the death of the firstborns, Pharaoh finally relented and said that the Hebrews were allowed to go free. For about 5 minutes before he changed his mind and chased after them. Pharaoh and his soldiers chased the Hebrews to the Red Sea, which Adonai parted so his people could cross. Once the people were done crossing, Adonai closed it, as Pharaoh and his army were chasing the Hebrews. The Hebrews got out fine, but many of Pharaoh's soldiers drowned. The survivors would then go to wander the desert, searching for the lands they were promised by Adonai. This was an angle of the plagues of Egypt which I had never really considered before. The plagues were meant to demonstrate Adonai's power not just over Egypt itself, but over Egypt's entire pantheon. But one might wonder, why specifically Egypt? Well, the obvious answer is that the Hebrews were enslaved there, but they were exiled in Babylon too, and Adonai never sent any plagues down upon Babylon. Why specifically Egypt? One possible reason for Egypt getting the bully treatment is that all throughout ancient history, from pretty much the birth of civilization to the Roman Empire, Egypt was one of the most powerful powerful and influential kingdoms in the ancient Mediterranean. They were one of the first agricultural societies to form ever. They survived the Bronze Age collapse, and even though they were conquered by Persians and Greeks, they were still incredibly influential culturally. In the story of the plagues of Egypt, Egypt was essentially an incredibly powerful juggernaut for all of ancient history, and the plagues of Egypt symbolize Adonai showing his power over such an incredibly influential nation. And he did this by using Egypt and the Egyptian pantheon as a punching bag. I mean, as an example. This is one interpretation of the plagues of Egypt that I really enjoy, and it has another interesting implication. If the meaning we just discussed is true, and Adonai really was showing his power over the gods, that could imply other gods exist in the Tanakh, or Hebrew Bible. And it's not just here, but later in Exodus, when Adonai gives Moses the 10 Commandments, the first commandment says, "You shall have no gods before me." That wording implies there are other gods, and you might even be able to acknowledge their existence so long as you keep Adonai as number one. This is an interpretation that many scholars agree with, but some in the Jewish and Christian communities aren't necessarily comfortable with. But polytheism in ancient Judaism is a can of worms that is beyond this video. Feel free to hash it out in the comments while I watch from a safe distance though. I want to thank everyone for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you want to see more. I have a Discord where I share memes and updates on future videos, and I also have several methods of supporting me which you can find below. So until next time, have a good one.